Hey guys, welcome back to another video and happy another end of the week. The weeks are flying by. So the last video I made was a pretty depressing view or a sad view of the trucking industry and the turmoil that is going on with all the shutdowns and struggles and economic downturns. So now it's time for us to actually take a look at how the freight market is being affected by all of this. Let's take a look at capacity changes, freight volumes, rejection levels, diesel prices, and how it affects flatbeds, reefers, and dry vans. And at the end of this video, I'm going to share with you what I am planning to do this winter, what has worked for me over the past 4 years. Ready? Let's go! All right, so first we have the net changes in carrier population. How many carriers did we lose net last week? Well, as of last week, we lost another 394 carriers, continuing the pattern of a negative net change for the whole year, basically, right? There hasn't been a single time where we saw a positive net change. And as a reminder, this takes into consideration both carriers that came into the industry and those that went out. Now, if we look at the total trucking authorities versus the amount of freight volume available in the general market, what we can see is that freight volume, this is year to date, is up 20% year to date, while the amount of MCs in the market is negative 5% year to date. So yeah, basically capacity is continuing to slowly leak out of the market, and based on the stuff that we discussed in the last video, larger carriers are not really absorbing those smaller carriers that are going out of business because larger carriers started parking their trucks as well. Okay, then we have the general freight market. Blue is freight volumes, white is the rejection level. And what we can see is that both freight volumes and rejection levels, freight volumes, they went down over the past couple of days. They were stable before that for pretty much the whole month of October. But rejection levels have been going down since the beginning of October. They were kind of stepping down until now. Currently, rejection levels are at 3.5%. So 3.5% of the total freight volume actually gets rejected and ends up on the spot market. Moving on to the same chart, but week over week, just to see how it changed week over week, we can see that volumes dropped down 1.53% since last week, whereas rejections dropped down 0.57% since last week. All right, spot versus contract rates show us how much more do contract carriers earn per mile on average than spot carriers. Now, we have been kind of bouncing around the 78-cent mark. Currently, it is 81 cents. So contract carriers are getting paid on average 81 cents more per mile than those spot carriers. Now, surprisingly, the good news comes in the form of diesel prices. This is something I did not expect. I'm sure that many of us didn't expect this, but diesel prices are continuing to slide down. Currently, diesel prices are at $4.48 per gallon on average, but I have to agree with those of you in the comments that say that it doesn't matter what diesel is doing because this price is still way too high for the rates that we see for loads, posted for loads, right? So yeah, but anyway, I would recommend celebrating small wins. That's what I do. That's what keeps me sane. Now, if we take a look at the diesel map, good news here, we can see it's pretty much red, which means that pretty much every single market in the United States experienced a decrease in diesel prices. All right, now let's talk about flatbeds, starting with the spot market volumes. We can see that volumes are continuing to slide down according to that blue bar graph. But another thing that is very clear is that we're following the trajectory of the 5-year pattern. So volumes do tend to decrease towards the end of the year for flatbeds, with the exception of the last few weeks when volumes kind of have an uptick and then go back down again. It's not surprising because one of the biggest factors that influences flatbed volumes is construction. And a lot of construction does tend to stop or slow down in winter months because of bad weather. Now, in terms of flatbed spot rates, we can see that there was actually a minuscule little increase, if you can call it that. But the good news is we are following that 5-year pattern. The bad news is the 5-year trajectory shows us that rates do kind of slip slightly towards the end of the year. Currently, the average posted rate for flatbeds is $2.31 just about. Then we have the DAT market map, which this one shows us the outbound volume. So basically, how many loads compared to trucks are there on the spot market according to DAT. If it's red, it's a hot market, meaning that there are more loads than trucks. Nothing really changed. I mean, the Pacific Northwest is still hot, although something happened in the Pendleton, Oregon area. You can see it's cooling down here, but this tells us again, nothing about what kind of lanes go out of there. The South right here, we can see it's still contracting. The market is becoming less and less desirable, I guess. It's less hot. But in general, these two areas are still the areas where you can get potentially relatively better prices as long as you don't care where you're going. Now let's take a look at the inbound map showing where these flatbed loads are actually going. And we can see they're going Montana, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, all of these areas, Texas as well, the East Coast. Not much going to the South, which is considered one of the better markets for flatbeds. Not much going to the Pacific Northwest, which is also considered, again, if you don't care where you're going, a better market. So basically, yeah, you can get relatively better rates if you're willing to go to one of these dead markets. But if you're looking to go to a hot area or a relatively better market for flatbeds, well, that means you have competition because every single carrier who has a flatbed wants to go there as well, and that means prices will go down. All right, next we have our reefers, and starting with the spot market volumes, we can see reefer volumes actually experienced a decrease week over week, and it's weird because it is no longer following this 5-year trajectory. Right now, we should be seeing an increase in volumes, but it is not happening this year yet. In terms of the spot rates for reefers, we can see that there was another decrease, but it is following that 5-year trajectory. And if it continues following it, then next week, or actually this week, we should have seen some increases in reefer rates because this chart is a week behind. So we should be seeing, but is it going to happen? Only time will tell. Currently, reefers are at around $2.27 per mile. This is the average rate on the load board. And one of the most valid questions I get in the comments is, how is it possible that this is the average? We're not seeing these kinds of rates. Well, something to keep in mind is the average also includes those short loads, the 200-mile for $600, $700 loads, which bring up that average. But if you're looking at longer loads, yeah, for reefers, longer loads, they do not pay anywhere near this. All right, in terms of the general freight market volume for reefers, we can see that, leaves much to be desired, right? For the most part, it was no change, which is gray, or a decrease, which is red. There were areas where there were increases, like Lincoln, Nebraska, there was Spokane, Washington, Minnesota, there were places in Mississippi or part of Mississippi, South Carolina, some areas in the Midwest, but the increases in volume that happened, they happened in market areas that don't have much volume to begin with. As you can see, most of them are flat, with the exception of Minnesota. But let's take a look at rejections. So in terms of rejections, we can see that it is a little bit more hopeful, I suppose, for reefers. North Dakota, Utah, Grand Junction, Colorado, all of Nebraska, Arkansas, parts of Mississippi, Minnesota, South Dakota, upstate New York, Indiana, Tennessee, even Miami, Florida, they saw an increase in rejections. Houston, Texas as well. But places like Idaho, Spokane, Washington, Pendleton, Oregon, and the Midwest, these are the two areas that, historically speaking, week over week, are the areas where you want to be with a reefer. These saw rejection level decreases. But the question of the week is, where do you have to go if you have a reefer to grab relatively better opportunities? All right, so first of all, we have Portland, Oregon, which has 22.38% rejection, but take a look at it. It's pretty flat, so be careful. There's not a lot of volume. However, it is surrounded by places that do have volume just in case. Then we have the Pendleton, Oregon area, which has a 21.35% rejection. We have Spokane, Washington, which has 16.72% rejection. Twin Falls, Idaho has 15.25% rejection. The only thing I would say is be careful, because that rejection level is kind of falling off a cliff week over week. Now, also we have Fargo, North Dakota, which has a rejection level of 42.71%. And then the Midwest right here, it ranges from 8% to 23% rejection. All right, last but definitely not least, dry vans, starting with spot volumes. Well, for dry vans, there was pretty much no change in spot volumes, maybe a slight little decrease, but we are following that 5-year pattern. And according to this 5-year pattern, we should see a small increase in volume this week. That will stabilize, and then a big uptick in volume towards the end of the year. Again, this is if we continue following that 5-year trajectory. Now, if we take a look at the average dry van spot rates, we can see there was absolutely no change here. And actually, they are currently at $1.88 to $1.90 per mile. This is the average posted rate for a dry van. Again, no deviation from that 5-year trajectory, and hopefully it continues, because in the next few weeks, we should see those spot rates start increasing. Again, only time will tell, but we are keeping our fingers crossed. All right, let's take a look at the general freight market for the dry van, starting with volumes. And wowza, I mean, this map is all over the place in a good sense and in a bad sense. A lot of increases in volumes, a lot of decreases in volumes, a lot of no change in volumes. So I'm not really going to go through this map because you can see it's all over the place. But yeah, I mean, there are some areas that had increases in volume, some decreases. The gray areas show no change. For rejections, this is a map that definitely brings me joy, because we can see there was a few increases in rejections for dry vans, especially in the northern states. So Minnesota, North Dakota, some of Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, some of the southern states, the Northeast, Southern California. And then I'm not going to count these because there are no rejection levels here in general. You see they're flat, but yeah, pretty good. Now, significant decreases happened in Idaho, Spokane, Washington, Pendleton, Oregon, Nebraska, parts of South Dakota, Iowa, Pennsylvania, and then South Carolina, maybe Illinois as well. So question again, where do you have to go next week in order to grab relatively better opportunities with a dry van? So first we have Green Bay, Wisconsin, which is their week over week rejection rate of 12.39%. Midwest ranges from 5 to 8% rejection. And then we have Ontario, California, 5.84% rejection. But I'd be very careful with Ontario, California and Southern California, because if you look around, people from Arizona, at least that's what we do, people from Arizona will be deadheading to California to grab better opportunities and diluting that situation. But yeah, it looks like the Midwest is still the place to be for dry vans. So yeah, I want to give you guys some insight in what has worked for me every single winter for the past 4 years. We all know that winter is around the corner, bad weather is already happening everywhere. So the first thing that I do is I use the Snoqualmie Pass. Oh my God, did I pronounce that correctly? Snoqualmie, I don't know. Snoqualmie Pass to my advantage. Something that you're going to realize is that if you're in the Pacific Northwest, like Washington or Oregon, or even Idaho going to Washington or Oregon, places like Yakima, Washington and Grandview, Washington have relatively better paying loads. And this is because of location. Very often brokers will post a load from Seattle that is actually coming out of Yakima, Washington, which is quite a ways away. It's a deadhead. But at times that deadhead is very much worth it. But again, use the Snoqualmie Pass to your advantage. Every single year, when I have a truck in Seattle that is trying to get out of Washington and we have to deadhead to Yakima, I will use that as an excuse why I need a higher rate because, hey, the Snoqualmie Pass might be shut down. It is a pretty dangerous area to go through. Not a lot of carriers want to go through that pass, especially in the winter. So that's number one. Number two, states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, North Dakota, South Dakota, these are areas where you can grab relatively better opportunities simply because in the winter, there is harsher weather than anywhere else. It is freezing there. And from my personal experience, older trucks do tend to freeze up and have to get repairs or maintenance done in order to keep moving in such cold temperatures. So there are a lot of fall-offs that happen there because of these freezing up trucks, and not a lot of carriers want to go there. So if you have a truck that performs the way it should, if it doesn't freeze up, this is an area you should check out, the northern states, because you will end up, if you're patient enough, you're going to end up recovering loads where trucks fell off either because they froze up or because the road conditions did not permit them to actually get to the shipper. My point is, even in the worst of situation, there is always some sort of advantage you can use if you just know where to look. Start getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. I said it once before, and this is really important. So tarps, cold areas, bad weather, bad road conditions, as long as you know you're going to be safe, say yes to things that other carriers might avoid. That is one of the ways you can put yourself at an advantage this winter. In other words, just eliminate your competition by making unique decisions. At least that's what I'm planning to do. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Wishing you all a fantastic rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next video.